Welcome to Fabian's Zeitgeist. I'm your host, Fabian Kira, mechanical engineer by training, global observer by obsession, and professional overthinker by default. This podcast is my way of decoding current events, economics, politics, and the societal ripple effects that shape our world. I'm not here to pretend objectivity. I've lived, learned, and accumulated biases like anyone else. What you'll hear is my unfiltered perspective, honest, flawed, and open to contradiction. As Socrates once said, I know that I know nothing. You do disagree to my opinions. That's good. It means you're thinking. So, no matter where you are, no matter if you're young or old, a woman or a man, you're white, black, Asian, blue for all it matters. If free speech and unapologetic thinking are your thing, then welcome home. With that out of the way, let's jump straight into today's topic. In today's episode, I want to dive into a timeless and complex question. What makes people fight in wars? What makes some take up arms and fight, while others choose peace and surrender? Is it just the difference between being a hero or a coward? Is it being stupid or smart? Is it being idealistic or realist? Is it maybe all of the above and maybe something else on top? I don't know. But this topic found its way to me in the wake of recent conflicts, especially the war in Ukraine. What struck me in the early days of the invasion wasn't just the flood of people fleeing the danger, but a surprising number heading straight into it. Volunteers from all over the world, idealists, Ukrainian patriots, some extremist nationalists. People knowingly walking towards the fire. These days, the once impressive stream of volunteers has all but dried up. Ukraine is struggling to find replacements for its exhausted, wounded, or fallen soldiers, as the war drags on with no clear end in sight. The initial surge of patriotic fervor has faded, replaced by the grim reality of attrition and sacrifice. In Germany, media outlets and political voices have begun to call for Ukrainian men who sought refuge abroad to be sent back to their homeland, but not to rebuild, to fight, and perhaps to die. So let's talk first about the psychology and reasoning behind conflict. Napoleon Bonaparte once said, "There are only two forces that unite men, fear and interest." And I couldn't agree more. These two forces seem to be the fuel behind most wars. It's about protecting what we already hold dear, driven by the fear of losing it. Or it's about gaining something others have, or making sure they don't have it anymore. In the end, war often boils down to a very human equation. Desire plus fear equals conflict. But there's something deeply human about wanting to be the good guy, no matter the context. Even if we are on the side of the aggressor, we instinctively cast ourselves as the righteous side, as having no other alternative but initiate the aggression. And to make the narrative stick, we've become masters of justification. We invent stories, ideologies, and moral frameworks that mobilize us against them. It's not just about winning, it's about believing we are right while doing it. So what are the basic justifications? I would group them into four main groups. Two hard ones, for which the propaganda machine has no need to do much, and two more abstract, for which it takes, in some cases, centuries to build. In the first group, we have survival and the sense of belonging. Survival is the most primal motivator. When basic needs like food, shelter, and safety are endangered, people will fight to preserve or acquire them. Think of it as the Maslow bottom line. When survival is at stake, diplomacy often takes a step back. I will give here as example the wars that Israel has been waging pretty much since its formation, for its own survival. During the Second World War, approximately 6 million Jewish people, men, women, and children, were systematically murdered by Nazi Germany. In its aftermath, in November 1947, the United Nations approved a partition plan to divide the British Mandate of Palestine into separate Jewish and Arab states. The State of Israel was officially established on May 14, 1948. On that day, David Ben-Gurion, head of the Jewish Agency, proclaimed the formation of a Jewish state in Eretz Israel, to be known as Israel. This declaration came as the British mandate over Palestine ended, and it marked the culmination of decades of Zionist efforts to establish a homeland for the Jewish people. On May 15, 1948, just one day after the State of Israel was established, military forces from Egypt, Transjordan, now Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq launched an invasion aimed at preventing the establishment of the Jewish state. Their efforts were unsuccessful, and the outcome led to significant territorial losses for Palestinian Arabs, an event remembered as the Nakba, or the catastrophe, due to the mass displacement and suffering it caused. Tragically, this conflict remains deeply entrenched in the present. On October 7, 2023, Hamas launched a coordinated and brutal incursion into southern Israel, resulting in the deaths of approximately 1,200 people. The attack marked one of the deadliest days in Israeli history and triggered a massive military response, further escalating tensions and deepening the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. I intend to explore this topic more in detail in one of the upcoming episodes. In the meantime, if you're interested in exploring the roots and complexities of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, I highly recommend the multi-part series Fear and Loathing in New Jerusalem from the Martyr Made podcast created by Daryl Cooper. It offers a deeply researched and emotionally gripping narrative that sheds light on the historical forces and human experiences behind the headlines. So we talked about survival as a justification for war. Now we'll talk about belonging. Family, community, brotherhood. These are the emotional roots that bind us. When these are threatened, people fight not just for themselves, but for others. It's the I'd do anything for my people instinct, and it's often the most enduring motivator in long-term conflicts. Roman soldiers in the legions and the Greek hoplites in the phalanxes likely fought not for abstract ideals, but to protect themselves and their comrades. The guy sitting on the right, the guy sitting on the left. If you were to ask the soldiers in the trenches of Ukraine today what they're fighting for, most would likely say for their families, their wives, children, and parents, for their comrades beside them, for the school they went to, and for the park where they first shared a kiss with a girl. Of course, some might say they're fighting for democracy, the right of self-determination, for the right to carry a Ukrainian passport instead of a Russian one, to raise a blue and yellow flag and not the white, blue, and red Russian tricolor, or to pay taxes to Kiev rather than Moscow. But such civic motivations belong to the second group of justifications, the more abstract ones. Identity and moral values. Identity, what does it mean? It's religion, ethnicity, nationality. These are not just labels, they're anchors of selfhood. They ground us in who we are and what we stand for. Strip them away, and you don't just lose a name or a flag, you lose a sense of meaning. When someone's identity is challenged or denied, conflict becomes a way to reclaim dignity and existence. Wars of independence, cultural revolutions, and even ideological clashes often rise from this need to assert who we are. I would argue identity was at the root of the most destructive wars we have ever seen. The Arab conquest wars followed by the Crusades, they were started in the name of religion, spreading the message of the right God. The nationalism rise from the late 19th century culminated with the horrific First and Second World Wars. In Germany, in light of the war in Ukraine, there is a push for the Kriegstüchtigkeit, military readiness. Surveys and public discourse suggest that many Germans remain hesitant about the direct military engagement. This reflects a long-standing cultural and political skepticism towards war, rooted in Germany's post-World War II identity. Germany's memory culture, centered around nie wieder, never again, has shaped a cautious approach to nationalism. Expressions of national pride, such as flag waving, are often subdued due to historical trauma and fear of repeating past mistakes. You will not find here the German flag waving in front of homes. Germany's post-war liberal democratic model promotes pluralism and inclusivity, a strong move away from ethnic nationalism towards civic identity. It's a safeguard against the kind of exclusionary nationalism that fueled World War II. And guess what? It worked. In a Focus magazine poll from March 2024, only 32% of Germans said they would be willing to actively participate in defensive combat operations if Germany were attacked. 57% rejected the idea of fighting for their country. 11% were undecided. A striking 75% expressed little to no confidence in the German army's ability to defend the country. Another study from the Forsa Institute from 2023 found that just 16% of Germans said they would grab a weapon without hesitation if national defense required it. Shaming people for their ancestors' actions clearly undermines their motivation to resist, and it's not so easy to restore that drive if and when needed. I would argue the newest justification for wars revolves around moral values. Freedom, justice, equality. Abstract? Yes, but when channeled properly, these moral values can move people to do extraordinary acts of courage. History is full of individuals who've risked everything to defend these values, even when they weren't personally affected. Think of international volunteers in foreign wars, civil rights activists, or whistleblowers. They often act out of moral conviction, not self-interest. But here's the twist. Moral values might be the least stable motivator for conflict. Why? Because they're subjective. What one group sees as justice, another may see as oppression. Freedom for some might mean restriction for others. These values are often reframed, rebranded, and weaponized to justify actions that contradict their original intent. Take any war label as a fight for freedom, you'll likely find propaganda, moral ambiguity, and competing narratives. Moral values are powerful, but they are also malleable, which makes them both inspiring and dangerous. Let's take the example of the American Revolutionary War. The justification was the right of self-determination, freedom from the oppressive ruling of the British Empire. At the same time, the very ones screaming for their freedom rights were oppressing and using slaves for their own economic benefit. But I bet they were seeing themselves as moral and justified. So, while survival and belonging are visceral and immediate, identity and moral values require belief, interpretation, and often a leap of faith that makes them potent but also precarious. Here's a paradox. Why are people in poorer, less democratic countries often more willing to fight than those in wealthy nations? And the wealthy democratic nations more deserving to be protected? Don't we have more reasons to fight? My take on that. In developing countries, identity is a powerful motivator, often rooted in historical struggles for independence or survival. It reflects a stronger, sometimes more visceral sense of self, shaped by religion, ethnicity, and national sentiment. These elements tend to play a more central role in shaping people's worldview and actions, for better or worse. Take Afghanistan, often called a place where empires go to die. From the British to the Soviets to the Americans. I think Alexander the Great also had a short stint there. Afghanistan, it's a land that has humbled global powers, not just through terrain and tactics, but through the sheer resilience of its people and the willingness to fight, to kill and die if needed. Another example, the civil war in Syria. History records it for now as having begun with a popular uprising against the brutal regime of Bashar al-Assad. I'm saying now, as in 50 years from now, it might be a different explanation for the reasons it started. However, what started as a call for democracy quickly spiraled into a full-blown civil war, one marked not just by political struggle, but by deep religious and ethnic divisions. Sunnis, Alawites, Shiites, Kurds, groups that had coexisted uneasily were suddenly thrown into a violent conflict, each fighting for survival, influence, or identity. In developed countries, especially across Europe, national pride is often viewed with suspicion. Historical abuses of nationalism have left a deep imprint, and in today's cultural climate, overt patriotism can feel out of sync with the zeitgeist. Countries like Hungary and Poland, which embrace more traditional narratives, are sometimes labeled as regressive or out of touch. The waves of migration, the rise of pluralism, and the emphasis on individual identity have diluted the old pillars of unity, shared religion, ethnicity, and national pride. In some circles, nationalism is seen as outdated, even toxic, something associated with alpha male bravado rather than modern civic values. And let's be honest, it's simply not considered cool anymore. This shift has had its benefits. We've become less violent, less prone to initiate conflict, and that's part of why Europe has enjoyed a relatively long period of peace. But there's a flip side. You've probably heard the saying, hard times create tough people create good times create weak people, and weak people bring back the hard times. It is a cycle as old as civilization itself, and it speaks volumes about where we are today. In Europe, we've enjoyed decades of peace and prosperity, but with comfort comes complacency. The question is, are we still tough enough to face hard times when they will return? And what will we do when the moment comes to stand up, to defend what we have, what we believe in? Because, as you know, the winter is coming.
Hi guys, it's Eva, Fabian's better half. At least that's what he calls me. So, did you enjoy the podcast? If you did, go ahead and hit that like button. Even better, rate it and subscribe. That way you'll be notified as soon as new episodes drop and you'll be helping others discover the show. If you'd like to support Fabian's Zeitgeist, you can do so by donating via the PayPal link, which is available on the podcast's website, www.fabianszeitgeist.com. That's FABIANSZEITGEIST. Your contribution helps ensure the continuation of the podcast and keeps the conversation going. Also, don't forget to leave us your feedback. It helps shape the direction and quality of future episodes, so feel free to share your thoughts. Until next time, stay critical, ask questions, form your own opinions, and be ready to change them if you hear better arguments. Fabian always listens, eventually, especially when I tell him he's wrong, which is often. Alright, bye guys.